أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وعلى أصحابه المنتجبين. Brothers and sisters, I begin this video with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I'll be making a short video. I'll be offering my own personal summary of the well-known, respected book called Our Philosophy. In Arabic it's called Falsufatuna, and I'll be reading off my laptop over here because most of my notes are on it, so I'll be referring to my laptop during the entire video. So as I said, today we'll be reviewing this book. We are going chapter by chapter, so today is an introduction to the first chapter by the author, and we're going to be looking at who the author of Our Philosophy is. The author of this book is known as Ayatollah al-Shahid Sayyid Muhammad Baqr Sadr. This man is widely regarded within both the Sunni and the Shia schools of thought to be an original thinker, an extremely formidable theologian, philosopher and political activist. He was born in the Iraqi city of Al-Qazamiyya in 1935. His lineage goes all the way back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, through the Prophet's great-great-grandson Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Imam Muhammad Baqr al-Sadr was subsequently martyred under the tyrannic hands of then Iraqi President Saddam Hussein in 1980 at the young age of 45. However, in his 45 years of existence, he managed to produce and to publish over 6 jurisprudential books, 3 books on the fundamentals of law, 3 books on Islamic economics, 3 books on theology, 3 books on Quranic tafsir, the interpretation of the Quran, books in philosophy, logic, 2 history books, 5 books on Islamic culture, and over 30 academic articles. He is also the teacher of well-known and respected scholars, including Ayatollah al-Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Fadlallah, Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi, and also Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim. Now, this book, Our Philosophy, is basically a general critique of the materialistic philosophy, and thus it opens with an introduction to the social issue that continues to plague modern society. The author begins by examining and critiquing the social schools of thought, including socialism, communism, and capitalistic democracy. The author then goes on to make the case for the Islamic system, and he lays down his arguments as to why the Islamic system is the best solution out of all the other competing social schools of thought. So let's have a look at chapter 1 of the book, but before we do so, I should like to say that in no way is this brief summary a substitute for the real book. So, it would be a great injustice on my part to say that this is a substitute for the book, like I said. So my main aim in this presentation is basically to entice the viewers into looking up this book and perhaps maybe purchasing it, or if you already have it, then to start reading it. Because there's going to be many things that I'm going to leave out of this presentation because the book is quite lengthy, so I can't cover all of it in the time that we have, so I'm going to be summarizing it into small digestible pieces. So the author begins by critiquing capitalistic democracy, as I said. He says that it places tremendous importance on the individual's personal interests. Moreover, we see that in capitalistic democracies, they're essentially materialistic. They're materialistic in the sense that they are devoid of any articulate worldview or any ideology. The author claims that this is so by saying that the capitalistic system emphasizes the safety, the interests, the liberties and the freedom of the individual, and by default it secures the interests of only select individuals within the society at the cost of the majority of everybody else. Now, This line of reasoning is almost found indubitably within all first-year economics textbooks that argue the same assumption, that since all individuals within a society, if they're seeking to maximize their own personal interests, then this automatically leads to the fulfillment of the interests of all of society as a whole. However, when we think about this point critically and in more depth, we realize that this could not be further from the truth. You see, when you adopt an outlook on life in which materialism dominates and any transcendent form of philosophy is neglected, shunned, or it's marginalized from vocality, moral views and duties are thus suppressed and they're annihilated, leading to deep social and communal problems. Why, do you ask? Simple. Because the rights, the liberties, the freedoms, and the interests of those who are less fortunate, those who are the minority, they're completely neglected. The capitalist might offer a retort and say that everybody in society has the same access to the freedoms and opportunities that everybody else has, and therefore it is up to the individual to either make or break himself. In other words, it is not their problem what happens to everybody else so long as they're doing okay. Now, due to the enormous economic resources that they have at their disposal, control of government bodies, of legislation, of mass media, of judiciaries, it becomes possible. Foreign markets, their factors of production, their resources are also not spared, nor are they secure from any hostile takeovers, exploitation, and ownership. We see that therefore there is a very strong link between imperialism and capitalistic democracy. Now, there is a school of thought which is led by the Marxists. It's obviously founded by Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx. It's called dialectical materialism, which is a method of basically understanding history and understanding economics based on the notion that the basis of reality, what constitutes reality, it's constantly changing, therefore it is not static, and this is due to a conflict between, it's based on a conflict between dialectical opposites which arise from internal contradictions which are inherent in ideas, in movements, in events and so on. So here we see that Marxism sees that all of the evils of capitalism are down to the ownership of private production and private property, private ownership and the means for production. So if this concept of private ownership, if it's removed and if it's abolished and the property becomes the sole ownership of the state, meaning it becomes public, then the self-interest or the self-interested nature in man and people that seeks to maximize, like in capitalistic democracies, this thing will die. Basically, their self-interested nature, it ceases, it dies down, and the possessions and the control will be passed from the individual to the state, to the government, or to the community at large. Now, this remedy sounds quite good in theory, does it not? Although communism did solve many of the problems that were brought about by the capitalistic system, it did so at the cost of immense human suffering. So we see that the remedy was only temporary, it was transitory. The socialist system brought along with it tyrannic dictatorships, deprival of human freedoms, the stifling of basic human emotions, constant fear of imprisonment, torture, executions, loss of motivation, economic vigor, and the debasement of basic human values, and so on. In the views and in the opinion of the author of the book, we see that the problem, unlike what communism states, it does not lie in private ownership per se. However, it lies in something which is much more profound, and that is in the neglect of man's spiritual dimension. Self-seeking and self-interest are inherent in man's nature. This is not the product of private ownership as Marxism wrongly assumed. Private ownership is a product of man's nature. We should not confuse the two. Therefore, communism and socialism, they mainly substituted they substituted a handful of capitalists for a handful of party officials and bureaucrats. Therefore, we see with both of these systems, they fail to provide a solution which is capable of solving the problems of human society. One of them is rooted in a dangerous and an unequal materialistic worldview. The other one is unable to satisfactorily understand man's nature. Now, we ask the question, what is the Islamic solution that is offered by the author of the book? The communists, they have abandoned man's self-interested behavior, and they've kept the materialistic worldview, whereas with the Islamic system, they've abolished this materialistic emphasis, yet they place a different metaphysical criterion. So they look after man's spiritual dimension, unlike the other ones. In Islam, private ownership is not abolished, it is allowed. However, the system gives a completely new meaning to what it means to be human. It redefines human existence. How does it do so? The Islamic system is essentially based on a transcendent source of life and existence, belief in God. Therefore, the highest values and the highest criterion of all human activities and pursuits should be done within this context of seeking God's approval. No system that we know of can successfully claim that it offers a solution to man's problem without taking into account humanity's innate nature. The key is to establish a balance between the two. Islam successfully does this by harmonizing man's self-seeking nature, by not abolishing private ownership, yet it abolishes the materialistic tendency by making God's approval the ultimate end in itself, and our human activities as the means to achieving that end. This is reinforced in the Quran in chapter 99, verse 6 to 8, where God says that upon a day when men shall see their works scattered before them, whomsoever has done an atom's weight of good, and whomsoever has done an atom's weight of evil shall also see it. So such a thing like this is not present in the materialistic worldview. Other systems do face a trade-off between sacrificing the good of society for the individual or sacrificing the good of the individual for society, whereas Islam offers a specific. Other systems face a trade-off between sacrificing the good of the individual for society and sacrificing the good of the society for the individual, whereas Islam breaks this trade-off and it offers a specific system for man's emotional, spiritual and moral potentialities by considering both the welfare of man and the welfare of society. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali bayti at-tayyibin at-tahirin al-ma'sumin.